Very much. It's really good to be back doing webinars. It's been around 6 months since we've done our last one of these, and a lot has changed at Digitali, a lot of big developments. So it's really great to be back, showcasing some of the data that we have to you today. I'm going to be talking you around the 3 key areas that Elena has already outlined. But first of all, what I'll do is I'll start by taking you through an introduction into Digitali, just talking you through who we are, and also what the data is that we're going to be sharing with you today, and a little bit more around Soda, which is our product that we're going to be showcasing in the webinar today. So for those of you that are not aware of who we are, Digitali is an audience research company. We have been working in the audience research sector for 20 years. It's our 20th birthday this year. And we spent many of those years as a UK-based company working with BARB data, creating reports on BARB data. We are a licensed BARB bureau. And in 2019, we expanded our offering to launch a new product called Soda, and that's the product and the data that we're going to be sharing with you today. We launched that in 2019, and we were measuring Netflix viewing from a panel of 1,000 in the UK. Off the back of that, we have expanded over the past few years pretty extensively, and we're now measuring Netflix, we're measuring Amazon Prime Video consumption, we're measuring HBO Max viewing across 11 European territories, including all the major European territories. We've also measuring Turkiyye. We've also got 4 Latin American countries. We've got Brazil, Mexico, Argentina, and Colombia. And we've also got a panel in the US now as well. So that takes us to 17 total countries. We've also got Disney Plus launching in April. So we're on the cusp, as in next week, we'll be launching our measurement system for Disney Plus as well. So that will be adding a 4th major global SVOD platform into our system in April. So we're very excited about that. The clients we were able to work with, we're very happy and honored to work with some of the clients that we have. Some of you on today, I'm sure, are clients, and we have clients across the length and breadth of the media industry and beyond. And we're obviously hoping to continue to evolve relationships with more companies in the sector as well. So let's move on to a little bit about the Soda data and just talk you through a bit about what it is that we're going to be sharing with you today. So the data that for Soda can be best described really as data captured via a viewing history. So the data is data that is passively collected data from a nationally representative managed panel. So we are representing the audiences of SVOD subscribers. So we have, for the platforms we have, Netflix, HBO, Amazon Prime, in each of the territories, we have a representative panel that represents the combined subscriber bases of those SVOD platforms. It is a fully managed panel, and the data collective is fully passive, and we collect the entire account data. So essentially anything that is viewed on that account, we're able to collect. The best way of thinking about it would be that if you are watching something on your smartphone, you press pause and you click play on your TV set, you are able to start from where you left off on your phone. That information is being stored. We are giving people the opportunity to share that data for us in order to be rewarded for doing so. So it's fully passive, it's in the home viewing, it's out of the home viewing, it's across all devices, and it covers off a huge amount of territories. So that's why we believe that a global SVOD measurement system is possible, and we do feel that we are leaders in that space at this point in time in terms of generating a truly globalized, harmonized, consistent methodology across global territories. So let's just look at some key data specifications for today's webinar. Unless specified, we will be talking about all Soda regions. We're trying to go as global as possible with this webinar. There are instances where we're talking about specific regions, but pretty much we're going to be talking about global consumption. So that is including all of our Soda regions: UK, US, France, Italy, Germany, Spain, the Nordics, Netherlands, Poland, Turkiyye, Brazil, Mexico, Colombia, Argentina. And also the data will be inclusive as much as possible of all Soda platforms as well. So that will be Netflix, Amazon, HBO Max, again, unless specified. And the majority of the analysis we will do today is on the full year of 2022. However, we will be looking at some further historical analysis to be included where appropriate as well. So let's get started. We're going to start off today by talking around the importance of content performance analysis. And in particular, we're going to start by talking about the fact that As content budgets are shrinking and content performance becomes more scrutinized, we do need to go beyond standard reporting. A deeper understanding of viewer behavior beyond standard reporting when it comes to platforms like SVOD is really important to help us understand content strategy, how these platforms are thinking about content, what that content value that content is driving. And this should be able to provide a competitive edge, going deeper than standard reporting of figures like streams and reach. Looking deeper into the data should provide a competitive edge in terms of understanding the types of analysis and the types of metrics that these companies are looking for in terms of understanding where content drives value for them. So I think this is a really, really important thing to consider. And that's why we're going to be diving a bit deeper than just standard top tables and reports. But having said that, I'm going to start with a standard top table. But the point really here is that they're not telling the full story. Whilst they are very, very important, we can see here that we have top 20 series by platform for reach and streams for all SODA regions across 2022. And we have Netflix, Amazon Prime Video, and HBO Max in here as well. Again, so we have the top by reach. We also have streams in there as well. But we've highlighted a few of these instances red and a few of these titles red because they are shows that have not been renewed for a further series. So the likes of 1899, Resident Evil, and Netflix, Paper Girls, and Amazon Prime Video, whilst featuring high in these top lists, featuring in those top 10s that you see on the SVOD platforms themselves, they have not been renewed. So what is it about this content and its content performance that means it's not getting another series if I'm featuring in the top 10? For example, of course, there are other factors, budgets, etc., that come into it, but there are significant factors within the viewing data themselves we can look at to understand why shows that seemingly do so well are not able to get a recommission. And that's what we're going to be kind of diving in deeper than this analysis today. So where we're going to be driving in beyond our standard reporting is in three key areas. The first of that is viewing engagement. So we're going to be looking at how well content does in terms of engaging an audience through a piece of content. So if it's a series, we're looking at how many episodes through a series they watch. Are they watching all of the series? Are they watching half of the series? If it's a movie, we're going to be looking at how far through the movie they view. And then we're going to also be looking at consistency and frequency. So how often is content driving people back into a platform? When we're talking about subscription-based models, it's obviously very important that content is effective at driving people back in at regular intervals so that they're maintaining their subscription. So it's a slightly different twist on the value that content can drive instead of just total viewing levels. How often is it bringing us back in? How engaged is it keeping us with the platform as a whole? And the third of those is live viewers. Obviously, light viewers is an area we're all very familiar with, something that a lot of people do analysis with across linear television, for example, as well. But of course, it's equally as important, perhaps if not even more important, with an SVOD system, because light viewers are your churn risk. People that are watching a small amount of content, perhaps they are likely to then churn off and not subscribe to that platform anymore. So being able to keep them engaged through content is really, really important. Of course, this kind of all centers around the two really key aspects of a subscription-based model, which is acquiring a subscriber and then retaining a subscriber, so acquisition and retention. We are going to be touching on them today with these three key areas, but in the next webinar, we're also going to be diving a lot deeper into acquisition and retention of content, and that's on SVOD. So as Elena said, stay tuned for the next one. We'll be diving even deeper into those key areas. So let's start with engagement. So one of the metrics that we can look at for engagement is what we would call series completion rate. So here we're looking at, again, all platforms, all regions, Netflix and Amazon across all regions with a content that has a minimum of 50 million streams. And then we're looking at some examples of very high performing content in terms of engagement, and then slightly lower, the lower end of the scale in terms of engagement as well. So if we look at this show Wednesday, I'm sure we're all familiar with Wednesday, really big hit, 1.3 billion streams on Netflix. You've got here across all of the regions, but a completion rate of 86%. So this is telling us that when somebody watches an episode of Wednesday, they end up watching 86% on average of the entire series. So they are watching a significant way through that. That's a high score in terms of completion rate, meaning that show is very good at keeping people engaged. It's driving people to watch through the title and through the series. And then we have some other examples. We have Untold, The Girlfriend Who Didn't Exist, Trainwreck. Some of these, Trainwreck, the Woodstock documentary, some of these on Netflix are very successful. We look over to the Amazon Prime Video side of things. Reacher, we're all familiar with. Lord of the Rings, Rings of Power, again, did okay in that space as well. The Summer I Turned Pretty is another title that we will pick up with and show in another slide going forward around light viewers, showing that that title in particular seems to have performed well with all of these metrics that we're looking at today. On the lower side of things, you can see that these rates are significantly lower. So if we look at this title here, we've got streams of 287 million, so it's higher than all of these titles here, but the completion rate is 35.7%, meaning that when people watch that show, they are not finishing the entire series. They're only getting kind of a third of the way through that series on average, meaning that it's not able to engage people. So that significant drop-off might mean that there is concern about that show's ability to bring viewers back in and engage them going forward. Some of these shows here with a slightly higher rate, but look at Light Years, The Peripheral, these shows again with low levels of completion rate as well. So that's another area that we are showing that has, we can dig deeper into the viewing, not just beyond total streams or total reach, to see how content engages viewers. And the same thing can be said season on season. So when you're looking at a series, how well does it perform looking at season on season? So the last analysis we did was for season 1 only. And of course, through the first season, we expect to see people dropping off between episodes 1 and episodes 2. But by the time you get into season 2 and season 3, you would expect that to flatten out. But it's also really important to understand the drop off between seasons. Is there something that happened in season 2 that wasn't engaging people, or from season 2 to season 3 as well? So here we have 2 titles. We have Emily in Paris, which performed pretty well in terms of season on season drop off. There was a slight drop off from season 1 to season 2, and then another slight drop off between season 2 and season 3. However, this was released at the end of December, so these figures could well increase as well. But the performance throughout the seasons is relatively flat, showing that, when people are in and people are engaged with this show, they tend to stay there. It's one of the shows that tends to get less critical acclaim, but is being consistently renewed by Netflix. So it's obviously driving viewing, and it's keeping people engaged, and that's why Netflix are commissioning it for 3rd, 4th series. The Royals is an acquired piece of content, so not a Netflix original, but you can see here that it had significant drop off, in particular from episode 1 to 2. It then came down, and it's really having kind of modest levels. It's hitting at about 20% of its first episode reach for series 2 and series 3. So this is a show obviously that hasn't driven as much engagement. Out of all the viewers that came in for that first episode, around only 20% have made it through to those series 2s and series 3. So it's key to see the key differences between this sort of performance. Movies, a slightly different metric when we look at movies. So we have what we call average VTR, which is essentially a view through rate. So how far through the movie are we watching? We obviously don't have a series to go through, we have a movie. So it's essentially the same metric, but we're just looking at how far through the movie was viewed on average. And we have some examples of good performing and less good performing content on these 3 platforms as well. So for Netflix, Falling for Christmas, The Weekend Away, The Noel Diary, all doing really well at engaging people through the movies. 365 Days, This Day, The Sea Beast, Tower of Strength, this Pinocchio, the most recent Pinocchio movie, not doing quite as well in terms of getting people to stick through the movie. So you've got people that are stopping the movie, not watching the entire movie through there as well. And then some other examples on Amazon Prime Video, HBO Max as well. In terms of that viewing. So Free Guy, Nobody and Old doing really well on HBO Max, with the Harry Potter movies, The Grinch Stole Christmas, perhaps more familiar titles, not doing so well. Black Adam was a big show for HBO Max that didn't quite have as high engagement as some of these other ones that we've just mentioned as well. So again, another metric, understanding how far through the content is viewed is a really important metric for understanding, engagement, the relationship it's having with its viewers. So going into the genre view, in terms of consistency, we have reach by, here we have a slightly different view. So we're moving on to consistency now, and we're looking at the genre-based view here. So we have for Netflix, Amazon, and HBO Max, we have a slightly different cut of the data. So what we're looking at here is we're looking at documentaries, dramas, and comedy, and we're looking at the proportion of the audience that watches these on a certain level of months. So to explain this one out, let's look at this bottom line for comedy here, 66%. What this number 66% is telling us is that 66% of the Netflix audience are watching a comedy every month in 2022. So they watched a piece of comedy every month. For drama, it's 65%. And then obviously for documentary, it's lower, it's a 30%. So 30% of the audience are watching a documentary every month. Documentary content is bringing them back in every month. 24% is bringing them between 10 and 11 months. 21%, 7 to 9 months. And then 15% of the audience, 4 to 6 months. And only 10% of the audience are coming in and watching a documentary in 1 to 3 months. For drama and comedy, 2/3 of the audience are watching a drama or a comedy on Netflix every single month. On Amazon and HBO Max, where we know that the overall levels of engagement are lower, we can see that documentary has a high proportion of its viewers only coming in for 1 to 3 months. So only watching on 1 or 3 months. You can see that drama and comedy have about a quarter of them only watching a drama or a comedy on 1 to 3 months. And these numbers at the top end are quite small in comparison to the Netflix. So only 11% of viewers on Amazon are coming into a comedy every single month on Amazon. Only 12% are coming into a drama every single month on Amazon. And for HBO, it's similar sorts of numbers, 14% and 9% as well. So Netflix is more successful at being able to drive people in to that content, but we know that comedy and drama in particular, you know, with vast quantity of content on the library, is driving people in to watch on a regular basis. And it's interesting to see how content can do that. It's further interesting to look at how this works at an individual title level. So we've just taken a few titles, and instead of looking at how many months, we're looking at the average number of months or the average number of days. We're doing a couple of comparisons. So you've got on the left-hand side, Netflix originals, shows on Netflix that have performed very well in terms of high numbers, but they don't have a particularly long life cycle. The viewing will come down and will end up being relatively modest. Or you have shows like Friends and Superstore, which are acquired pieces of content, and they are successful at driving high volumes of viewing from a smaller audience. But when they bring their audience in there, they're good at engaging them regularly and almost creating heavier viewers. So this is where this is successful. And you can see that in this data here as well. So if we look at All of Us Are Dead or Inventing Anna, we can see that for those shows, they're getting people in to watch at around 4 days. So it takes them around 4 days and they finish, and they're obviously not watching anymore. And that is around 1 to 2 months. So that show is engaging them for 1 to 2 months of their subscription, ultimately. If we look at it on the other side of Friends, we're getting 16 days, Superstore around 10 days, and it's 2 to 3 months. So the engagement overall and how often that content is bringing people back in is better for this sort of acquired content, perhaps, but on a smaller scale in terms of total audience. So they do two different things, but again, this is showing why there is still really good value in the acquired content here, because it's so important in gaining an audience that are going to come back in regularly, and again, keeping that audience retained and engaged. So the final section we're going to look at in today's first section is the light viewer analysis. So of course, light viewer, really important analysis. We got to understand what is driving viewing of those that are most of all a churn risk. So for light viewers, we have categorized a lighter viewer in this element as a viewer an account that watches less than 15 minutes per day on average. So for Amazon Prime Video, we can see that light viewers do make up a pretty sizable chunk of the audience in general. We're going to show you Netflix in a bit, which shows you it's a much smaller proportion of the audience because of the overall levels of engagement. But on Amazon Prime Video, you can see that there are around 30-40% of all viewers there are light viewers. However, the individual shows have a differing level of success when it comes to actually engaging those light viewers. So this is the show that I mentioned earlier, The Summer I Turned Pretty, The Summer I Turned Pretty, which is a drama, romance, and again, it had a total reach of around 19 million. Now that 19 million is not too dissimilar from Outer Rage here or The Wheel of Time that is above it. Its viewing is actually less than the total viewing of Wheel of Time, but it's got 42% of its viewers are accounts that are watched less than 15 minutes a day. They are lighter viewers. So it's actually got a higher number of lighter viewers than the Wheel of Time, for example, in there as well. It also has a higher than Upload. So both of these, whilst performing totally better, actually appealing to those who you would say could be a churn risk better. So that is another really key thing to understand in terms of how it appeals to different segments of the subscriber base. Outer Range, Light Years, The Wilds, all don't do anywhere near as well in terms of engaging light viewers. They may have high reach, 15 million viewers for Light Years, but only 3 million of those were light viewers. So 15 million total, 3 million were light viewers. So it's just engaging a more heavy audience, and that will be taken into consideration when looking at recommissions. Is it what, do we need to engage our heavy audience more, or should we be investing in content that engages our lighter viewers more? And then similar analysis for HBO Max. Pretty Little Liars, very successful at doing that. And then if we look at things like Rick and Morty and South Park, which are shows with very high levels of content, and would really appeal to that heavier viewer that wants to watch lots and lots and binge through it, they are only appealing to the 13% of light viewers. So maybe they are driving heavier levels of viewing. So do we need more of these shows, or are they serving that purpose, essentially? And on to Netflix, as we mentioned, these percentages are much, much lower. Around only 4% of Netflix accounts watching less than 15 minutes per day. So it's a much lower number when it comes to Netflix in terms of the same definition of a light viewer. However, there is still some key differences. If we're looking at 4% of the total Netflix subscriber base, we're still talking at over 8 million total global subscribers for Netflix. There's still a good chunk of revenue there that's potentially at risk. Emily in Paris, again, we've already talked about that show. People wondering perhaps why it gets many recommissions. It's driving light viewers. It's getting a high proportion relative to other content in terms of light viewers. And here are some other key examples. Harry and Meghan is another quite interesting example, probably driving people in that wouldn't ordinarily just go to Netflix and watch content because it's of a particular interest. All of Us Are Dead, the South Korean content, another one of those examples. And this all, focused around the fact that really the SVOD platforms and Netflix in particular are showing that they are comfortable cancelling high-profile shows. Warrior Nun, Netflix is 1899. These two shows are big performing shows that had high levels of viewing, loyal fan bases, but overall ended up being cancelled by Netflix. And we can see a couple of reasons as to why that's happening here. We can see that for 1899, big reach, massive stream, 60 million reach, 300 million streams. However, its completion rate that we can point to as being perhaps one of the reasons why this show did not make a second series, only 57% completion rate. So people weren't watching all the way through. It wasn't going to be able to generate anywhere near those numbers for a season 2 based on that sort of performance. Warrior Nun is another example, which again had pretty strong levels of performance for its first season, but then it almost halved its audience for second season. So we can see here that we have 30 million, which drops down to 17 million, 217 million streams, dropping down to 120 million. So its completion rates, whilst they're better than 1899, the season-on-season performance was probably not as Netflix would have hoped it would have been, and that's why it hasn't made the cut. So again, numbers not too bad, but that season-on-season trend would be something that they would take into consideration for sure. So that's talking around content performance and content in general. And so now we're going to look a little bit around how SVOD can be used as a tool for generating brand exposure. So I'm going to start by talking around how SVOD gives the opportunity to generate high levels of exposure for brands across multiple territories. However, could there more be done? So for example, we are able to reach a significant number of accounts and individuals through SVOD platforms globally. However, is that being fully utilized? Are we seeing the maximum being drawn out of this for brands on these platforms? And just a bit of context to begin with, in December 2022, Amazon, Netflix, and HBO Max reached a combined 180 million accounts across global SODA territories. So that is 180 million in 1 month accounts. So that could be upwards of 500 billion individuals across these territories that are being reached. And that is a huge number. So it can generate, so SVOD can generate high levels of exposure for brands. That's clear. And we've got 4 kids brands here: Pokemon, Paw Patrol, Lego, and Peppa Pig. And we can see the big numbers that they're able to achieve. So for Pokemon, we can see that they're reaching 43.8 million, Lego 42 million accounts, Paw Patrol 28, Peppa Pig 35 million. Total streams numbers being pretty much in the billions for all of them. And they've managed to achieve this through varying degrees of content. So Peppa Pig with only 3 titles, Pokemon 59, for example, Pokemon with 701 hours of content compared to only 99 hours of content for Peppa Pig. So they have been able to achieve this with different levels of content on the platform, but the numbers are sizable. And it comes from slightly different areas for these platforms. So for Paw Patrol and Peppa Pig, less so for the US in terms of how much that's driving. But for Pokemon and Lego, huge proportion of their global exposure coming throughout the US. And then a decent portion from LATAM, also from the UK, France, Italy, Germany, and Spain. And then some also from other European territories as well. So to get to those overall numbers, the breakdown is this, and you can see that obviously US is a significant proportion for Pokemon and Lego in particular. And the other thing that we obviously want to understand is frequency as well. You know, it might be that we're achieving that audience, but how often are we bringing them in? So we can look at something like Lego, for example, and we can see that actually Lego content is being watched on average by 10 times a month by its viewers. Pokemon 8 times, Paw Patrol, about 9 times, Paw Patrol the same, and Peppa Pig just over 8 times. So they're all achieving around 8 to 10 views per month from that audience as well. So they're getting them in regularly on average. So we're going to start talking now about, you know, we're getting these big numbers, but could we do better? Could we get more? Could more be utilized from this? And I think this comes back really to the importance of the home screen when it comes to a SVOD platform. So like this Netflix home screen that we have here, this is obviously a really important place. Can we find our content on this space as much as possible? Can we get here so that it drives more viewing? We can show you that by showing you the next chart. The next chart shows you that shows you the power of that home screen ultimately. So we've got data here for Better Call Saul on Netflix, and we see here that we've got it split by the individual seasons. So for all the 6 series, we've got total reach by month, and you can see here that we've got 3 big spikes. So the 3 big spikes that we've got are for season 4, season 5, and then season 6 here as well. And we can see is that what we're not actually seeing is just viewing for these series. We're actually seeing viewing for series 1, we're seeing viewing for series 2, 3, and 4 here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 here. So it's bringing new viewers in to the platform each time. Every time that this show is released, it's back on the home screen, it's driving more viewers to that program, and that is driving this peak to be higher and higher each time, so that it's getting more and more exposure each time. So appealing and getting itself on the home screen is just generating more exposure. So how could we go about doing that? Perhaps release strategies could be one of the ways that we could look at that. So there are different ways that someone like Netflix, a platform like Netflix, would look at releasing content. Until very recently, they were predominantly doing box set drops, but I think it's fair to say that they have started experimenting a little bit more with release strategies. So season 4 of Stranger Things was split into 2 parts. Lupin was a series where they had 2 series released within 6 months of one another. Better Call Saul is a weekly drop, for example. And then you have the more traditional example of a box set drop, which was Squid Game. But perhaps these other examples could provide the opportunity for more exposure for this content. So let's look at that Lupin example, and we're comparing it here to Sex Education. We're just looking at Netflix in the UK for this particular example, but you can see here that we've got 2 shows released in 2 different ways. So Sex Education was released as a box set drop. Lupin was released as a first series and then a second series midway through the year. So they divided the content up into 2 halves, released it as 2 series. And you can see here the overall levels of exposure and the slightly different curves they're able to achieve. So for Lupin here, we can see that it's following a very similar shape, perhaps not quite as successful overall as Sex Education, given that it's a French show. But you can see here that it's getting a similar shape. And then when it gets to the second series release, there is a boost. So it's able to achieve almost a further 500,000 viewers in that second release. And then it's getting a further increase here. So what we're suggesting here is that had it been box set dropped in one go, perhaps the audience would have followed closer to this dotted line here. So overall, perhaps 500,000 viewers more have actually tuned into Lupin in Netflix in the UK because they released it in 2 series rather than box set dropping it all at the same time, which is where you see this more traditional curve for a box set drop, which is a kind of smoother curve, which then just flattens out when you end up in what we would call the long tail of viewing. We have another example of that from Pokemon. Pokemon Master Journeys is a really interesting example because it shows us the way in which the same piece of content was released in 2 different ways at 2 different times as well. You can see here that we've got in the dark green, sorry, we have the US data, and then for the light green we have Europe. So Europe was released, 27 episodes released across Europe on the 2nd of September, and then there was 12 episodes, 15 episodes here, and 15 episodes here released in the US. So we can see here that we have 10th September, 21st of January, 26th of May, 3 different releases for similar amount of content. So you can see here that again, when each of those is released, we get a additional spike of viewing that is driving up the overall cumulative reach. So this is a slightly less period of time. However, we would expect to see this curve flatten out because all episodes have already been released. It won't be appearing back on that Netflix home screen as much. Therefore, it could be a flatter trajectory, whereas this one has had its bump ups from various different mini releases that we say. So it's really interesting to see how these trends will continue to develop with 2 very different release strategies in 2 different regions. Another way to achieve that would be franchising. So, adding more content around a brand or having spin-offs. So we're going to talk a little bit around those now. So the first thing would be, what's the impact of releasing a supporting movie, for example, to an existing series? So this is the viewing to the series of Paw Patrol split by month, and you can see the impact of the viewing year on year when the movie was released in 2021 as well. We see that big increase in viewing overall to when the movie was released in that year. So there was obviously a factor there in terms of driving higher levels of viewing, creating more interest for that series. Another example is a spin-off like Narcos Mexico. So Narcos Mexico is obviously a spin-off of the original Narcos show on Netflix, and we can see here that the cumulative reach from January 2018 all the way through to 2022. So we're reaching over 50 million accounts. However, we can see smaller bumps and increases, but relatively sizable bumps and increases on the release of each of the series of Narcos Mexico. By the time we get to series 3, it's a much more modest increase. It doesn't have as much of an acceleration, but for series 1 and series 2, you can definitely see a marked increase in the number of people that are coming into the original Narcos piece of content because perhaps they've also watched Narcos Mexico. And you can see here that for the original Narcos, we're seeing bumps in viewing when the series was released. So having supporting content, spin-off content can drive viewing for the original as well. And the final thing that could be a way of also generating further exposure would be through moving between SVOD services, playing the field, as we say. So an example of this would be The Office US, which was on a Amazon Prime Video in the UK all the way until around the end of 2020. And then in 2021, it launched on Netflix. And this again is the cumulative reach. So we're saying that overall, it had reached around about 5 million accounts, but only after a few months on Netflix, it had reached a further 3 million accounts here. So the increase in its overall exposure by launching onto Netflix was substantial. And then by the time it reached the end of 2021, it was over 9 million. So it almost doubled its audience by then moving on to Netflix and exposing to a new audience via that platform. And going the other way, there's also an effect there as well. We can see that with The Expanse, which was on Netflix, but then Amazon got the original rights, the international rights to take on series 3 and took on the previous series as well. And you can see here that you can see here that we have viewing that increases after that move on to Amazon, and then it continues to increase as well with every new series that's added at that point. So again, moving on different platforms could be a way of exposing to a new type of audience as well. So we're going to move on to the final section, today's webinar, which is called How Content Travels. And this element is to look at how looking at the data that we have through a globalized, harmonized methodology, understanding how content travels and how content from certain regions can perform better and not so well in certain areas. And I think that's it's really interesting to kind of dive into this sort of data with the methodology we have that is obviously consistent across each of the countries that we run in. So first thing really to point out really is that obviously content originating from the US can provide it can provide really strong performance across the globe. US content is the most efficient at traveling across the globe. However, beneath that, if you look beyond the US content, there are some really interesting insights and really interesting trends that we can uncover using this methodology. So we're going to look a little bit beyond the US. We're going to almost take the US content as read to an extent that it works well globally, and we're going to move past that and start looking at some other relationships that we can see globally that we think are of interest. So the first of those is around Mexican content. So Mexican content performing particularly well in, obviously through Latin America, but in particular with Colombia. So it's performing particularly strong in Colombia, less so in Argentina and Brazil, but it also performs quite well in Spain, but surprisingly popular in both Poland and Turkey. So I'm just going to show you some examples of these shows here. So we have Dark Desire, which was a Mexican drama, and you can see here that the performance was particularly strong in Latin America. So the show reached about 60% of Mexican Netflix subscribers, but also the same number in Colombia, not as well in Argentina or Brazil. Pretty well in terms of these European territories, a little bit better in Spain than some of the others, but similar levels. And then also very strong in Poland and Turkey, which we think was interesting. And then not so well across Netherlands, Nordics, UK, and the US. And that is something that a similar trend that we're going to kind of pick through when we run through these examples. Second of those is Who Killed Sarah? Similar performance levels, really, but actually better in Colombia than it did in Mexico. Strong in Argentina and Brazil, strong across Europe, but then still not as good when it comes to UK, US, Netherlands, and Nordics. The final one is Diary of a Gigolo, which is again showing a similar trend. Spain doing well, not this time doing so well in Germany, France, and Italy, but again Poland and Turkey. I mean, look at the Turkish number here, 42%. So it actually performed better in Turkey than it did in any of the Latin American regions, and that's really interesting. I think a trend that we're actually seeing for the Turkish content, for performance of Latin content in Turkey, is that the stuff that does best is being defined as steamy dramas. So I guess read into that what you will. So the next thing we're going to dive into is Polish content. So content from Poland is performing particularly well at home, as you'd expect in Poland itself, but also that relationship back across the LATAM is still strong there and with some other European territories. And again, there's a similar story when it comes to the Nordics, Netherlands, UK, and the US. So let's look at a few examples for Poland. We've got High Water here, performing again well in Poland. 77% of Netflix subscribers in Poland watched it, but it also did pretty well in Latin America. And again, not so well in these 4 territories on the right-hand side here in Netherlands, Nordics, UK, and US. Again, very similar story for The Taming of the Shrew. And then we also have this one here, which is a show that also did incredibly well in Poland, not quite so well in Latin America. In fact, its best performance in Latin America was in Argentina, where it did significantly better than the other 3. So there is a slight difference here, but we can see here again, Polish content seems to be performing well. There seems to be a good relationship between these regions. One more, and we'll move through. And the story is similar when it comes to Turkey. So the viewing levels are high in LATAM and lower in the UK, US, Nordics, and Netherlands. So we're looking at some pretty similar trends. So we have here Love Tactics, and again, Turkey 60%, Colombia 40%, Brazil 35%, Argentina and Mexico lower, but again, not very strong over here. And again, this trend will continue for another self, particularly strong in Argentina at 60%. And then again here for this show, Bam Bam in Kamani. Content from the Netherlands. So we're now going to dive into that section of the countries where we're seeing kind of poor performance for most of these shows. The interesting thing is that content from the Netherlands also struggles in the UK, USA, and Nordics, but it performs locally well in Netherlands, but still travels well into Europe and areas of LATAM as well. So if we take The Takeover, you can see it performs well in LATAM, it performs well in Poland, it performs well in the Netherlands, but it still doesn't do as well in the Nordics, UK, or the US. And the same can be said for My Best Friend Anne Frank, which does really well in areas of Latin America, good in parts of Europe, and also well in the Netherlands as well, as you would expect. The final area we're going to talk about is South Korea. It's something that's a little bit more covered recently and really, really interesting because they have shown in recent years the potential to be a country that can generate a global hit. So Squid Game would be an obvious example. Parasite would be another. They show how content from this region can be a global hit. So we don't see any of those numbers that are lower. In fact, the lowest numbers we do see are for the Nordics, Netherlands, UK, and US for a content like All of Us Are Dead. So we have All of Us Are Dead, which isn't Squid Game or Parasite, but it's perhaps the newest version. But those numbers are still far higher, sorry, than the previous slides we had shown, where they're receiving over 20%, just under 20% in the Netherlands. But there isn't really a region in which this piece of content was achieving less than 18, 19%. In fact, in most regions, it's achieving 30, 40, 50% as well. So there's a really high performance really across all of our territories for All of Us Are Dead, and that's obviously a really key thing, that South Korea seems to be able to generate global hits that perform well everywhere. So asking the question really now, taking it back to that what we think is really interesting in terms of that relationship between Latin America and Poland, Turkey, we have looked at, could there be something around the tastes of these two regions that means that we are seeing how that content can travel really well between the two? So we have, in terms of what we're doing here, is we're doing an analysis of the top Netflix originals, and Netflix, Amazon, and HBO originals, and we're looking at performance of that content in Poland and LATAM. And again, we've drawn a chart here that shows a correlation between the two. So for this dot here, we're showing a program that performed really well in Poland, around 80% reach, but only got around 11% reach in LATAM. But a vast majority kind of sit in around this line here, showing that the numbers were quite similar. There's a pretty strong relationship between how a piece of content performs in Poland as it does in Latin America. You can see here that this number here, the R-squared value, is at around 65%. 65% is a strong correlation number. It's showing that 65% of the variation in one can be explained by the other. If we move on to Turkey and LATAM now, we can see again there is less correlation, only 42%, and you can see here that we have a number of pieces of content that perform well in Turkey but really don't land in LATAM. But there is still a lot of content that kind of sits in around this line. So again, still showing, I would say, relatively high levels of correlation between one another. And we're going to kind of benchmark these for you with our final slide and compare those to each other. So we have those R-squared values, 42% and 65%, as we just showed you, in comparison to some of the other relationships that we have. So a good example would be the UK and US. We would expect the UK and the US to have a strong relationship in terms of how well content performs, and that is exactly the case. There is around 77% value there for those. So the relationship between those two countries is strong in terms of the tastes and what they like to view and how well content performs in each region. Interestingly, Poland and Turkey within those two regions, not the ones that perform both well with LATAM, has a lower performance value, a lower correlation rate than with LATAM and Turkey and LATAM and Poland. So that's quite interesting. And then finally, the Turkey and US relationship is showing one on almost the opposite end of the scale, where there is almost no relationship there between how well a piece of content performs in Turkey and how well it performs in the US as well. That is the end of the webinar. I hope you have enjoyed it. I hope you've taken quite a bit of it. We're going to obviously hopefully have some questions, so I'll hand back to Elena now.
Thank you very much, Matt, for the brilliant presentation. I'm sure you've seen at the top of the screen that also Digital Eye founder and CEO Ali Vadati has joined us this morning. And I have to say that Ali has been very busy in answering most of the questions. We have a couple of questions. We're already over the 45 minutes, but Matt, do you think that we can answer a couple? So the first question is actually a very interesting notes on the completion rates. So when we talk about completion rate, it implies the percentage of people that finished the series. But Richard Marks mentions, if everyone watched the first 9 episodes of a series, but no one watched the last one, would be a completion rate of 0% or 90% for example, 9 out of 10 episodes. I would have thought that the first figure is better described as completion rate, whether the second as the amount of content viewed.
Yeah, thanks for that question. Yeah, so that 90% in that instance would be what we were talking about. So if they watch if everybody watched 9 out of 10 episodes, it would be 90%. So in terms of how far through the piece of content they viewed is how complete they viewed through. Take the note that perhaps completion rate would be better. There could be a better metric in terms of maybe we talk about view through into rather than completion, but that is what that metric is referring to. Richard, is that yeah, if everybody watched 9 out of 10 episodes, as you say, that would be 90% as opposed to 0%.
And then we have another question from Dotun. What is the standard period to wait before windowing a piece of content to another platform?
It's a good question. I mean, I think it will ultimately depend on the deals. I imagine there's some additional complexity in terms of how long you would wait before that. I think we were seeing the example of The Office we gave. In fact, they didn't move it from one to another. They just added Netflix to it, and we saw the impact that The Office UK had when it moved on to Netflix. So having it on 2 platforms performed particularly well. I don't think there's necessarily. I think it's a really interesting question. I don't know if there's necessarily a optimum period to wait for. A lot of people are on multiple platforms. We actually found that for that example in The Office UK was that a lot of people who were then watching it for the first time on Netflix also had Amazon Prime Video, right? So there were people who had Amazon Prime Video anyway. Some of them were watching The Office on Amazon Prime Video, but when it became available on Netflix, perhaps that was their platform of choice. That was where they went to first. So they were then almost moving on to Netflix to watch it there instead. Perhaps they prefer the interface. So there's obviously a fair bit of overlap between those, but there is also additional audience that is ready to view that content as well. So I hope that's kind of helped to answer that question.
Brilliant. And then we have another question. Have you had a look at attention levels of viewers on SVOD compared to linear TV maybe, or
Yeah, I think Elena, you might have been breaking up for that question, so I'm just going to repeat that in case nobody didn't hear that. So Sebastian's question, it was either have you had a look at attention levels of viewers on SVOD compared to linear TV or maybe other platforms? Our measurement system is really around kind of, it's almost transactional in the sense that has that content been viewed or not. So has that content been viewed? We don't go further in to understand attention levels. Our system is designed to passively collect the data in terms of has that pin content been viewed by that account, and then we can look at it at a very, very granular level in terms of how they watch through, how they, what device they watch on, how long it takes them to complete a series, how long it takes them to complete a movie. However, the attention elements, I think that they require a slightly different methodology in order to be able to capture that. So it's not something that we have done a huge amount on, but I know it's a very interesting space and one that's gaining more momentum in our industry for sure. The question really is our Disney Plus methodology consistent with other services? It is, yes. We have developed a methodology to be able to capture the Disney Plus viewing. One of the reasons why Disney Plus is a little bit later to our methodology than others is almost that for reason that they didn't have a viewing history as such. So we've had to go a slightly different way about getting that data, but it is possible. We've kind of found the ways to not do it, and now we found the right way to do it. So we are very, very confident that our Disney Plus methodology is going to provide identical data to the data that we're getting for HBO Max, Netflix, and Amazon Prime Video in terms of methodology. It's going to be directly comparable, absolutely.
Another question was, are you able to split the viewing by device type? For example, TV versus mobile and others? And yes, the answer is yes, our SODA platform allows that segmentation, that split. And another one, do you have plans to evolve your products and methodology to accommodate ads on SWOT services? So not right at the moment, but we do have people with the ad transcription on our panels across the globe.
I think just to add to that, sorry, Elena, we are able to do analysis of that data as well. So we are able to cut audiences by subscription tier is something that we'll be looking at in future webinars, and you know, if it's something that's interest, obviously get in touch, but we're able to cut viewing to content by the various subscription levels.
And then we have, is a viewer considered to have completed an episode if they started watching it, stopped, and then say came back a week later to finish it? Yes, we would. The SODA platform does that. What specific strategies are the major SWOT platforms implementing to promote and showcase African content, and how effective have these efforts been in expanding their audiences in Africa? This is a very interesting question. What we look at in our SODA platform is the country of origin. So this is a type of analysis that we can do. In terms of Africa, I'm not quite sure if we have that sort of metadata at the moment in SODA for Africa, but that's a very good question, a very good input. And about a question about content affinity, I think. So why do you think Mexican content is resonating in Poland? So yes, there's a level of you know, leveling playing fields for the producers on SWOD, and that's why we're seeing this power of the content to travel internationally. It could be that's some sort of affinity by genre. I would expect perhaps some countries more interested in drama, for example, but it could also be due to other reasons that all together create this correlation that Matt was mentioning towards the end of the webinar, or this sort of affinity in terms of content. And also perhaps it could depend on, or it could be due to the strategies of the platforms themselves and how they manage to push content in different territories. So it's a bit of a puzzle, I would say. Thank you very much. I think we got to the end. I can't see any more questions coming in. So thank you very much for joining us today in this first webinar of our new series. And as I said, if you're interested in understanding more about acquisition and retention, stay tuned, because our next webinar will be in about 2 to 3 months. And once again, this afternoon at 5:00 p.m. UK time, we are going to run the webinar again, but the content is going to be exactly the same. So thank you very much, everybody, and have a good rest of the day.